Welcome back to the Between Breaths podcast. I am Jacko, your host, a master instructor and mentor with the Oxford Advantage, and have a fellow master instructor from the Oxford Advantage, Daniel Pållson. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing his Swedish surname correctly. On the podcast, we've just finished recording, and he did give me a little lesson in trying to pronounce his surname correctly before we went live. So I hope I've done it justice. And he, like myself, comes from a professional sporting background. He used to be a professional tennis player before going into coaching, and now uses breath training with athletes. A lot within the conversation. We have a lot of conversation about the psychological, emotional, and mental side of tennis, which is applicable for outside of sports and just in all different types of sports, but also outside of sport into actual life. And there's a number of times Daniel does a beautiful job in helping draw out how there's these analogies with sports. We go on to talk about ultra marathons as well, which he has experience of doing himself and as well as coaching. So I was looking for some tips for some of my own endeavors that are coming up. But these analogies that represent what actually life is also like. So we even towards the end dive into a little bit of if you're, and because I know a lot of you are listening to this, you're also coaches. You may be fellow breathwork coaches, and yeah, there's some real gems towards the end about things that we can consider and use as a coach for not just coaching necessarily with our clients, but like about building our coaching businesses and practices. So you got that to look forward to towards the end. I was personally excited to have Daniel on. We met together a couple of years ago at Patrick McKeown's venue for an event over in Ireland. Really hit it off, and he gave me some quite stern advice before, which was going to be my first proper, let's say, proper ultra marathon event, like my first 3-day, multi-day event, the Ring of Fire. And there's a video documentary of the Ring of Fire. If you haven't checked that out yet, I know a lot of you have, and a lot of you even had someone the other day. Someone stopped us in Clanberis and said, well, they were serving us coffee, and said, "Oh, actually, I really liked your film." Like they were a runner themselves, and they'd actually they knew my sister, and then they'd watched the film. So that was quite nice. That was quite cool. Anyway, so I was interested initially to try and selfishly get some tips about ultramarathons, because Daniel's got a lot of experiences and he'd already given me some good advice, and you'll find that out in the podcast. But hopefully there's some tips in there for you, and we broaden it out far more than just tips for ultramarathon running. Actually, it's more tips for life, and using breathing within tips for life, and that could be the application within sport, but outside of sport as well. So I hope you enjoy listening to Daniel on the podcast. Before we get into him, we're just going to thank the podcast sponsors. We have 2 of them, both actually very relevant for if you are. I'm going to put them up here if you're watching on the. If you're watching on the YouTube, the video, our 2 sponsors, both ones utilise brilliantly for endurance sports, but also can be for anything. So like Ketone IQ from HVMN, 20% discount if you use code Jacko, or if you use the link hvmn.com/Jacko, the discount code gets automatically applied. Ketones is an energy fuel source, great for, like I found out, for brain health, focus, concentration, but also great for endurance events. And there's a lot of stuff out in the press at the moment about some of the real endurance high. I'm not high level endurance; I just take part for fun. But real high level ultra endurance athletes utilizing ketones, and that's exactly what is in the Ketone IQ from hvmn.com. So if you haven't checked them out yet, massively encourage you to do so. I will be using both the Ketone IQ and the Hydrate in my next events that are coming up. We've got an 80-kilometer, not Manchester to Sheffield, the Peak Divide in like next weekend, and then I'm back at Snowdon for the Snowdon 24 event, climbing Whitford as many times as you can in 24 hours. And actually, a little story about hydration. So the other sponsor is HMN24, and they produce a few products for like physical and mental performance. One of the ones that I love to use is the Hydrate, particularly for around running. And a little story for you. The winner of the Snowden 24 last year was struggling on his last rep, his eighth, my sixth. I gave him a hydration sachet, which got him to the end of the event because he was about to quit and go back down. Real life, true story. So yeah, the Hydrate from HMN24 comes in two flavors, the lemon and the raspberry. I'm sort of, yesterday I was a lemon guy. Today I'm feeling like a raspberry guy. It depends on the day, but both great flavors, both great hydration salts, electrolytes, and ever since I've been using hydration salts, I will not get any type of cramp issues. I actually use these in a morning, even when I'm not necessarily doing specifically for training, but then I'll also definitely put a sachet in my water backpack when I'm out for any long runs. And yeah, couldn't recommend those highly enough. It's an absolute basic to have. And HMN24 will give you a 10% discount code if you use Jacko10 at hmn24.com, and obviously the links for both of those are in the show notes. So if you're interested, well, not interested, I would say, I'm sure you're interested. I've always said that I would only ever promote and have sponsors of products that I personally use. You know, if I stop using products altogether at any point in my life and the podcast is still going, then I just won't have any sponsors. These are products that I use every single day and use them definitely within my training. So I'm sure you're interested. What I'd recommend is, these are some things will help you with you if you're into your physical exercise and endeavors. So check either or both of those two out. Now, let's get stuck into today's Between Breaths podcast with a fantastic guest, Daniel Pållson. We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly, we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast. So Daniel Pållson, and I've just had the practice of trying to pronounce your Swedish surname correctly. That was all right?
That was very close. Very close.
Good for another one. But welcome.
Most.
welcome to the Between Breaths podcast. Delighted to have you on.
Delighted to be on here.
And just for the audience, let's just have a little whistle-stop tour of where you've come from, what you're currently doing. We can go into how we met through the Oxygen Advantage, and then excited to delve into this world of ultra marathons and the experience you've had yourself, but then coaching. Really keen to hear or to give, slightly selfishly myself, but there'll be plenty of listeners as well that are engaging in these types of things. And for some people, I think it's like an ultra marathon might be 100-miler, let's say, but also for someone else, it's not technically an ultra, but it's like they've never ran 10K before and they've ran 5K, but they're a bit like scared of trying to go a bit further. And I know, like, I have personally had that myself. But give us a little insight into because of background in professional sport, and then I've got some questions in and around that. Over to you.
Well, my background, I went to US to play college in tennis, and after that I decided to go pro. And so I played pro for a while. You can say I was a very bad pro or extremely good amateur, whatever you want. Like at that, so it's more of a lifestyle. So I played tennis, and as you know, we talked about back in those days, breath training and breathing didn't really exist like it does today. And in tennis, it's a very mental sport because you're actually playing, have a lot of opponents. I mean, you're playing the opponent, but you're also playing the other coaches, the crowd, the referee, and also yourself. So
Yeah,
that's a lot of opponents to play. So people, when they watch a tennis match, they only think it's, the other opponent. So it's a mental game,
yeah,
and because of that, also very physical because you don't know when it's going to end. So you have to prepare yourself for the unknown versus where you have a fixed time.
yeah,
So my problem early on with tennis was, as a lot of players have, is getting anxious before matches,
yeah,
start of matches, but in particular at big high pressure points
yeah,
and getting very nervous. And you were kind of left to your own device. So you actually went into matches just kind of hoping
yeah,
that
yeah,
you don't it was just, and sometimes it worked for whatever reason, but it was just pure luck. There was no
yeah,
strategy, nothing to kind of anchoring at the moment or anything like that. And now I coach tennis players, so we can get into that a little bit later. But so back in the day, there was nothing to help people like us. And now I think this is actually definitely not mainstream, but I know like Novak Djokovic, he does a
yeah,
lot of this stuff. Not only does he do it for himself, but also looking at the monitor or in the changeovers, how the opponent is breathing. So
mm,
if you're really aware of your own breathing, you'll start paying attention to your
yeah,
opponent's breathing. That's really valuable information to see the
yeah,
physical, mental, and emotional state of your
yeah.
opponent.
I
I
think it's
only
a
think that, yeah,
yeah. I think it's really interesting. Great point on um, like we natural. It's very natural and intuitive us when we're in battle in competition with somebody in the sporting environment. And I played rugby where it's not one on one; it's 15 on 15. But in tennis, it's very intense. It's one on one, and you intuitively reading body language. And I think, as you say there, when you understand about breathing, there's a certain amount of it that intuitively actually you pick up on anyway. But when you understand it for yourself, but and for your opponent, I think it gives you a deeper level of understanding their sort of physical and mental state, doesn't it? That you go, okay, I'm actually not just reading like, let's say, what I'd call like global body language. You're now actually reading them on a bit of a deeper level. And like you say, tennis is like a. I mean, I played until I was about 16 or so. Like in the UK, like county level, I got to like a quarter final of a county championship. That was like my best achievement, and I was absolutely choking on every single big point because, as you said, zero tools on how to manage the pressure situations. I didn't even like looking back now, I can see a lot of stuff, but I didn't even know what was happening and what it was. It was just like I literally couldn't hit the ball when it mattered. I couldn't hit it over the net. Like I didn't dare hit it hard enough to get it over the net. I was like it, like fight, flight, or freeze. I was freeze, but I didn't
yeah,
know that that's what I was doing. I didn't know how to notice it. I just knew, and then it was like I just gave up, and then it was like, well, and then I played rugby instead. And then interestingly, what happened in high pressure rugby situations different to tennis because it's not just one on one, but yeah, nerves before every single game, and the same as you. Like sometimes would play well, sometimes it would get to me, and it was like just hoping that it would be okay. Um,
yeah. And I think the reason why tennis and also golf is because it's a thinking game. You have too much,
yeah,
like in normal life, you have so much time to think. You're standing still,
yeah,
walking up to hit a return or a serve. And at the time, when you get really anxious or really nervous, your legs start turning into jello. And it's
yeah,
just that was my breathing, like going like
yeah,
this, not even knowing that I can still to this day recognize all these feelings, in all these matches and not knowing at all what was going on. Just, left out the pure chance if that was going to happen or
yeah,
not. More often than not, it did happen. So that's just a shame that you didn't have the tools which
yeah,
you do today. But still, to this day, I would say still most professionals are not aware of this, but it's coming definitely.
yeah.
Uh,
You
so
know, I was lucky. I had a very, very good coach. Shout out to John Black, who he like. he actually was trying to get us to work, was more interested in like what was going on up here than actually our technique. Like we did loads of obviously technique, but um, he knew exactly what you were saying of that. He knew it was a mental game. Like he played professionally himself and was like he knew that side of it. And I actually really enjoyed the psychology side of it. I think, and at one point I wanted to go and study sports psychology pretty much because of this coach. Um, and just the bit that was lacking was like the tools to control the nervous system through the breath. Um, and that's just because it wasn't, like I say, it wasn't a thing, it wasn't understood, it wasn't something people were utilizing or coaching. And this, I want to point out for the listeners as well, this is all sort of or as well as this, or on top of this, you've got all the like the physiological, the physical benefits, conditioning wise, recovery wise, that you're going to get through doing utilizing some of the breath training on
Yeah, I
as
mean,
well. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, and in tennis, you have fixed breaks, so to speak. You have changeovers of 90
Yeah,
seconds, and where you can, you know, it's going to happen every 2 games, so you can apply it. You have 25 seconds in pro tennis in between points. You have 25 seconds,
yeah,
ultra short time, but you know you have 25 seconds.
yeah,
And you see the top players like Nadal and Djokovic, they always take as much time as they can to reset. And then you have in between first and second serve. And if you start thinking about like systematically how to use that to get your heart rate down and really focused to get
yeah,
ready for the next point, then it becomes both a strategy and a tactic that you can
yeah,
use. But of course, when I work with tennis player or any sport, I start outside the court or the competition to move it in slowly.
yeah, yeah.
But any sport can benefit. And I've seen in, for some reason, you know that better than I do. Why is breathing so popular within rugby in particular? You see all these national teams and you hear about it left and right. Why rugby versus other sports? Do you know
Uh,
any?
um, I think that there's one thing one thing I wanted to say was like that time in between points and then even in between sets where you just like you got to go and sit down, you got to sit
Yeah.
there for however long it is. It's like that is an opportunity potentially for some of us to constantly overthink about all of the mistakes you've just made, and it can just literally, you're in your own head just like ruining yourself. Or like you said, it can be a time to stay present and focused and be in a good place. And I think that I can't think of anything other than breathing that's going to help you in order to do that. And there's the like the focus, the attention, or the attentional focus, the ability to concentrate when we're practicing a breathing exercise, is that some people may say, well, that sounds like meditation. It's like, well, those two things potentially go a little bit hand in hand, but call it what you want. You can train yourself to be more present, and you can train yourself to not be that overthinker when you have that time. And I think whether we're talking specifically here about tennis, but I just want to open it up for people if they haven't made that connection themselves. It doesn't matter whether it's tennis or not. These things are in all sports. And then you go, but I don't play sport. Well, if you're listening to this, you don't play sport, it doesn't matter. It's like this happens in every single part of your day. And yeah, there's some very simple things that you can do. I think that with rugby, we have these stoppages within play. Um, and we come and typically we'd have a huddle, and then there'd be like some tactics potentially being given out by the captain or whoever. And within rugby at the moment, it's maybe you see a little bit of that from the outside. It's not that well understood at all. There's a lot of people seeing some of the top teams do it, so then they like come together and they go, right, we're going to take 2 breaths together, and they've just trying to do something that they've seen, say, New Zealand or France do, and then they take a very terrible mechanical breath. They don't know whether they're not necessarily in control of the nervous system and the response. So there's it started, and that bit of it is like a little crack, a little inroad, like when I go and do a workshop with a team, like, and that's the place where they want to start with it, I'm like, okay, cool, so we can do that. And why are we doing it? And sometimes the answer is, well, because we saw New Zealand do it. I'm like, what? That's your why? Like, but why are we doing it? Like, so we need to. What's your reason for doing it? And then, how can I help you if that's the thing that you want to do for a reason specific to you, not just because you've seen someone else do it? How can I help you do that better? And so, there's a huge part of that for me, just for very quickly for people of interest, that a huge part of it is what are they doing before they get to the huddle? The huddle isn't the time to sort your breathing out. The huddle is your time to be in a state where your nervous system and your brain can either listen and hear the information that the person, the coach or the physio or the captain or whatever is trying to give you, or if you're a decision maker, that you can make good decisions and get and speak clearly because you are in control. So, and that's a huge piece that people don't see or aware of. It's like, what are you doing before you get to that? So I have a question then from you say like when you're working with people now and these little like times in between points or in between sets, whether someone's playing tennis or not, irrelevant. Like just these periods where you can use your breathing to stay present, to stay focused, rather than just let yourself going overthinking. What are some things that you always go, right, these are some simple things that I start with someone, and are they things that you wish you knew when you were playing? I love that narrative. Like there's so much I wish I knew when I played rugby that I do now, and that's what that's where a lot of my passion for coaching within that sport. And I imagine it's similar for yourself.
Yeah, it's actually similar. I mean, tennis is a microcosm of life. Like we were talking, it doesn't matter if it's tennis, rugby, or work, but every time you play the point, like you said, you don't want to overthink because it drains you on energy. It's really energy draining. So you want to be intuitive. You want to just be in a constant flow state where breathing is key. Because if you're not balanced, if your nervous system is not balanced, like trying to hit a penalty on leaning over like on one leg. So that's number one. You need to be balanced. Then you can move over to be focused. And if you're lucky, you get into what happens after focus, like the flow states, where you're kind of just intuitively playing the game. And that's where you want to be all the time, if possible. So breathing is and tennis is fixed in a way that this is going to happen after every point. So you can use that, like you said, as an opportunity to have a ritual of breathing, getting the towel, looking at the strings like a lot of people do, and really connect with yourself and think about your breathing versus think about what happened the last point and what if I lose. So you're either in the past or the present, but try to connect with yourself. And breathing is the most powerful tool, and you're also the easiest because you have it with you there on the court. But normally when I start working with a tennis player or any type of sport, I usually start outside with readiness and recovery, just because I want it to be just doing one thing and not connect it right away with the sport, two things and at the same time. Although I do want to get in there fairly quickly to connect with their real life. So it's not something they only do after and then they forget about it.
Yeah.
But I want to move it in when I see it's time to move it in, because it's not just tennis, it's outside the tennis court or any sport in every situation, 24/7. Even like we can get into sleep later on as well. So you're connected to it all the time, because how you breathe outside a tennis court is going to filter in later on the tennis court. So it can be quite complex, and you don't want to make it complex. You want to have it simple. So you kind of want it just to evolve naturally, and you have to feel out the athlete. Like after 3 times you move into something else, and so on. Or maybe sometimes you have to wait for it. But I think in any sport, they can have tremendous benefit from doing breath training and being able to stay present. And being able to stay present, equally important in rugby as it is in tennis. this hopefully in 5 to 10 years to be fairly mainstream. But it's definitely an uptick the last couple of years. Definitely.
Yeah. It's coming, isn't it? It's definitely coming. I've said to a lot of the coaches that have done the Oxford certification with me, I've say like regularly, like, hold on to your pants because the next 5, 10 years are going to be like it's going to be busy because people are starting to take notice. And as we'd already sort of described, like there's the way sports typically work is like the top people, men, women, or teams start to do it, and they start to do it sort of in secret at first, and then people start to find out about it, and then others start to look into it, and then it trickles down, and then it becomes gradually more mainstream. And if it's something that's relevant to outside of sport, like breathing is relative to relevant for everybody, then it then can actually trickle down and reach outside of its sport, which is then it becomes really powerful because it's like, okay, yes, we can use this for like physical performance recovery, but also the mental side of it, performance recovery. But then, okay, this is actually something that can help people just manage their selves, their state, their thoughts, their anxiety, their stress. I think just picking up on a couple of things that you said, I thought were really interesting. I love stuff that's like really simple and make me go like, oh yeah, like almost like so obvious. Like I have not thought of it. With the you mentioned about like you've got those stoppages in play. If you're going to play tennis, you know there's this time in between points, and you know there's this time, so you can preempt it and go like, I know this is going to happen, so I can practice something away from tennis that then I'm going to utilize when I'm in it. And I think the same thing in life is like, well, you know there's going to be times in your day, in your week, in your month, in your year when you're overthinking problems, and you can practice being present and being able to calm that sort of racing mind, not when you're really stressed about something, but you can practice it separate so that then it becomes a tool that you're able to do during those times and those difficulties. I love any time when we can go like, we can take sport, and I love sport, and I love the competition, and I love all of that as much as anybody. But it really becomes sort of like rich and life-giving when you go like, it's giving me something like outside of that. Or if I'm working with a player, that it's like, I want to win the World Cup, or whatever their like thing is, and it's like, yeah, and I'm all in on that. I'm all in on that, and I'm all in on you on that for like, and if that's where we're going, that's where we're going. But when they start to open up some cracks towards like how this is going to help my maybe mental health outside of rugby, I'm like, okay, this is the real stuff, and it will help you with your performance. But then this is the real stuff. This is now about you as a person, not you as a rugby player.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's deeper, right?
I have 4 levels. I don't know how you do, but generally, I come in with a physical level. Like you talked about how this actually can improve your recovery, which everybody can understand, to get your heart rate down after, during, and before, HRV up, all these like that. It's kind of easy to understand. Okay, that makes sense. And then you move up the ladder with the mental, working on the mental, like how you stay sharp for a long time to kind of, because in tennis you use a lot of brain power, you get very fatigued, and just if you drop that in for 5 minutes, the match could be over. So that's the second step. And then the third step is the emotional step, like when you work on high pressure points, when it really matters, it's going to go either way, like in the third set or fifth set tiebreaker, if you play a big match, that in a few minutes you have lost or won, and it's going to come down to just a point or two. So that's how do you regain that, or penalty in a big Champions League final? You have 100 million looking at you. How do you compose yourself in those type of situations? And then the fourth layer, which you can call a spiritual or a purpose driven, where like that's you can call it goal or whatever, but also on a spiritual, much deeper level. So those are the four. But in general, you start with the physical, because you don't, if you connect with something that breathing that's kind of tough to grasp, and you start too high up on that pyramid, normally you don't connect with athletes because they're looking to that extra edge. So that's why you come in really with recovery, maybe doing something tough, like simulate high altitude training or the sports method, so they feel something, and this can improve their anaerobic threshold, for example, and stuff like that. And then you layer up the pyramid, depending who the athlete is and what they want as well. But if they're interested in next step, you can move up that pyramid. That's how I work. I don't know how you do it.
No, similar. I think like I got a background as an S&C coach. I guess still work as S&C coach, but just don't do that traditional stuff. But if the athlete or the person we're working with is wanting they're looking to improve their physical performances and recovery, well, there's lots that we can do as a starting point that feel like an S&C session. And it's like they feel comfortable within that. And for some of them, it's like that's just where they want it to stay. And it's like it's just meeting them where they're at and then going with them wherever they want to go with it. I think the final thing I wanted to say before we'll move on to shift gears into ultra marathons and is just that bit on flow state that you mentioned, like getting into that flow state. And you mentioned how like the difference between not overthinking forwards or worrying about what happened or stewing on what happened previously. And in tennis, there's this unique dynamic where you have a brand new point every time, and tennis is very unique like that. And you said that a uniqueness to tennis is that you don't know how long the game is going to last for. And I think the other thing with tennis is you have to win, which people mean, what do you mean? Well, you can't go 2-0 up like in football and just sit on it. You have to win. You haven't won until you actually have won. And some people might, if you've never played tennis, you might not understand what I mean by that. But it is like it's very unique like that. And the time in between all those points where you're not doing anything, it's challenging. Like I think you mentioned, like similar with golf. Like golf, they've got to walk for ages until it's probably even worse. You've got so much time not playing golf when you're playing golf. Whereas in sports like rugby and football, you're reacting to stuff that's going on around you. I think that helps you get into flow state a bit easier. Whereas all the still time thinking makes it harder. And that flow state, I think you used the word like, it becomes when everything's happening intuitively and rather than thinking about it. And I think I heard someone recently talking about, maybe I've read it in a book. It was something I quite liked about it. It was saying, trying to control the mind with the mind is crazy. And trying to control thinking with thinking, it's the same thing. So utilizing, I just keep coming back to going like, there isn't anything better than breathing in order to do that. And I think I really like the point you make of going like, we've got to practice this away from a more challenging environment. So practice it when you're at home and you're relaxed and you're happy. Practice it so that you can then use it when you are being challenged. Is that it?
Absolutely. And I think you made an extremely good point. Tennis is like a different type of sport than most sports, but also like a microcosm of life, because you have to win. So you can play really bad up until the other person can have a match point, and you have the ability to come back.
Yeah, as long as you win that match point.
So as long as you win that, you have, like in life, you have many chances but you have to win. You have to always, and it's like you have an endless amount. And like life, you don't know how long you're gonna live. The same with a tennis match. You don't know what's gonna happen. So you have this insecurity. It may be over in 1 hour. It could be 3.5 hours. And some in Grand Slams were at 5 sets. The longest match was 11 hours. So which is extreme, but you never know. So you have to be prepared, like in life, for the unknown. But you also have the ability to have ups and downs, come back all the time, to be always, no matter what happened, you have the chance to redeem yourself in the next point. So in life as well, you can kind of make that analogy to kind of come back, come back, stay present, come back, instead of just like in some sports, you're up and then you just stay there. You start growing, so to speak. You lock down the game to just control it.
Yeah.
Versus in tennis, you can't do that because you actually have to win. You're never done until you're done.
Yeah.
So it also requires a different mentality because of that. That you're not done until, and the toughest thing in tennis that they always talk about is the closer it gets to the end, the last game, to serve it out, or to usually when you serve it out and the last point. So because you have to get over that hurdle, you can't just sit there and kind of just push it back. So you actually have to create something all the time and cannot rely on the opponent to just miss. And I think that's something that you can bring into everything else in life, and kind of just try to stay present and try to be mentally better all the time, and be, and I think breathing plays a big part there. In order for you to focus and do that, you need to have a balanced nervous system. It's very, very difficult if you're super stressed. If you're super stressed, you will not be able to focus because you're somewhere else, and you will always say, I don't have time for that. Versus those who are completely balanced will naturally get into focus, will be much more productive, much more present. So it's ironic in that way. So I think tennis can be used, and I think even Andre Agassi wrote it in his book. I haven't read it, but he talks about that tennis is a microcosm of life. That so I think it's, but in essence, any sport can benefit from this. So it doesn't matter. We'll get into ultras, how you can benefit in that. So I think it's just a tremendous tool because of that.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears into ultras then, which it might actually be. We might be shifting down gears because we're going to be running slower. But and you mentioned there, and the nice segue with the nervous system as well. Like one of the big things that I think for me is like being able to manage that stress on the body and the nervous system that isn't coming from the intensity, it's coming from the long drawn out like time on your feet, just lots and lots of little impacts, the potentially the lack of sleep. You've got the nutrition side of it that's going to be hard, and then your mind is going to be, unless your body literally deteriorates in terms of the physicality, it's your mind that's going to be the thing. Before I did my first ever like multi-day ultra, we met at the master instructors with the Oxford Vantage event that Patrick McKeown himself put on, and it was, I think, a few weeks before I was going to take part in that, and you gave me some kind words of advice. And I think the most important thing you said to me then that sort of helped and took on was like, you were like, look, this thing is going to hurt like nothing. I don't care what other bits of advice people might have given you, some good technical advice, and there's plenty of things that you can do that technically, and things blah 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 that's going to help, and all these things. I think that you read me really well. You just hit me with the sledgehammer of like, this thing is going to be horrendous, like, and you need to go in with, you need to understand, you almost like you can't understand it until you've done it, but I'm going to try and help you get there, rather than you just being excited about this thing, Jacko, that you think is going to be wonderful. It's like, no, it's going to be a bit different. And that was very helpful, and I needed more of that. But just for the listeners, a bit of context, like what have you done yourself, and then in terms of coaching, but then also people that you've worked with that, and you mentioned about, I can't remember if you said it, was it your brother or
cousin?
Okay, that had worked with Goggins. So yeah, let's because David Goggins, that will make people's ears prick up. Just give us give us some context as to why we're going to talk about ultras?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, after the tennis career, I thought like, what's the toughest thing I can do? I had a financial background, went to Wall Street for trading, and of course, when you go there, you meet a lot of extreme people. My cousin who's actually American, he at the time, he was doing yoga and some triathlete stuff, and so he dragged me into a yoga, which I didn't like, and I started, and then of course after I've done a lot of that, and he never have I been done any sort of running. He dragged me to Vermont, 50-miler up in the mountains, which is a big difference, which we're going to get into when you run up very high elevation and down, which is,
Yes.
by the way, the worst thing. So not just flat, but from nowhere, I started doing that, and then and also Joe DeSena, who's the I guess the founder of Spartan Races. He had I remember one time he organized a snowshoe marathon in the mountains as well, running with snowshoes in the mountains. Like how a marathon? How can you come up with that? And by the way, ultra marathon, I guess, is per definition is if you just run one more meter than the marathon, you
Yeah,
have an
cats.
ultra marathon. But I think the gold standard is usually 100 miler. That's what you can. But you have longer marathons, ultra marathons, and shorter ones. And usually, not always, they place them in places like where it's hot or cold or with high elevation or both, where you go in through like UTMB down in Switzerland, Italy, and all those places where you kind of run in multi countries, where you go up and you go down. It can be both hot and cold, and that's it seems for me is to break down people mentally as well as physically. So you place them on purpose in those environments.
Yeah.
So I got into that ultra. So it's a acquired taste, I guess. But I had from 0 to 100 and not having any idea. And I remember my first race. So after 22 kilometers, when I have I had about 58 kilometers left, I started moaning and told my cousin, I don't, this is not for me. I mean, I was tired, really tired, but I had such a long way to go.
Yeah.
This is not, if you're an real ultra marathon guy, this is warm up for them. But for me, it was a massive event. And then he just said, well, just go for a little bit more. So I started going a little bit more. And all of a sudden, we were at 60 kilometers. And then I realized, you know what? I only got 20 Ks left. So I started sprinting. So I ran past everybody, and nobody does that in ultra marathons because they know what they're doing. They have an even pace. But since it was my first one, I just got this release. It was really, really runner's high. So just started sprinting up and down those mountains and not having any idea what I was doing really. So that was my first ultra event, which was a great experience because I went through basically highs and lows, both actually in the mountains, but also in that race. And that's also an analogy to life. That's what you do. You go up and down, up and down. So I felt more easy the last 20 Ks than when I've been doing 22 Ks.
Yeah. Which is crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. Like physically, it makes no sense.
It's completely disconnected your mind to your body. So of course, my body was a lot more tired after like 70 or 80 Ks of running versus 20 Ks, but my mind was very tired. So that tells you something that if you can connect that, you can do a lot more. So that was my first.
And that's, to me, when you come from like a traditional training background, like a sport or whatever, that's just fairly normal, rather than it being like an extreme thing like ultras, you have this like very constrained idea of like what's possible and how you do things, and it's like, okay, well, the longer very logical sense, like the longer I do something for, like running, the more tired I'm going to get. And then you do something that takes you not just a little bit outside of your comfort zone, like a gazillion miles away from the comfort zone, and you're like at the end of that, the Ring of Fire 3-day ultra I did, I sprinted at the end. I mean, it felt like I was sprinting. I don't think in reality it was that fast, but I definitely was going. And I remember after I finished, I was like, it doesn't make any sense in terms of what I've learned about like training that the the last mile of 135 miles could be the fastest. And it just opened up for me like this massive thing of not just you know the classic thing of like, oh, you can do, you know, we can achieve more than what we think we can, like I think of course we can, but when you feel it, those it doesn't, when you've done something that makes those words feel very true, like I said it then a bit like, because it sounds a bit cheesy and a bit corny, because I think that when you haven't actually gone to that place, that in that sort of extreme, it just sounds cheesy and corny. But what I felt it did was it went, or not what I felt it did, what it did was it made my rational thinking brain question a lot of the stuff that we think about training and go, well, there's something else driving this sort of energy that we have. It's not just what we think it is down here. There's this like, I don't know, there's other things at play. And it's probably far more hormonal in relation to what's going on potentially. But yeah, I don't know if you can speak into that at all, or but it just
Yeah, I have many, I mean, experiences from, and we take that race, for example. Like, why would I have more energy the last couple of hours than at the start? And there is some physiological, I guess you build up a lot of dynorphins, that pain that you feel.
right.
And when you realize also that you're going to make it, I just get that flush of, whatever you get, all those adrenaline
Dopamine
and just,
or
yeah,
yeah,
and,
adrenaline, yeah,
and endorphins, just, and you start running faster. And you had those throughout the race. Start, you go like this, but if you're not used to these highs and lows, they may feel like very, very big,
yeah,
although they now in retrospect they were very small. But if you're not used to going up a hill that's 500-meter in altitude, that is big for you. But
yeah,
if you're a mountain climb, that's baby steps. So I didn't know anything else starting
yeah.
off. So
But we
that is,
often, you know, just the thing with like with, I just think we often, and because the majority of our time, it is the case that like you're, or maybe not, but what we typically like relate things like energy levels to being like, what have I eaten?
yeah,
Like
yes,
with like that, or that I said it would be like I would assume that it, and I think that this is what I guess it really highlights the same way when if someone's like got an incredible relationship with sleep and circadian rhythm, they sleep fantastically compared to will have far more energy than someone that sleeps terribly but but is eating all the right things, or maybe maybe they're taking in enough calories in terms of energy, but their sleep is terrible. They're going to feel significantly lower energy than the other person, regardless of the actual calories that's going in. So it's like the dynamic within the body and within our physical exercise and pursuit is not determined on that side of it. Does that make sense?
absolutely. I think there are many. I mean, sleep, obviously, if you do multi-day races, very important. Nutrition, very important. But if you're coming back to that pyramid, you have the physical aspects,
Mm,
the mental, the emotional, and also your kind of your why or your spiritual kind of level where you're getting at. And it brings me into a guy that I know, Johan Steiner from Sweden, that broke the world record like 45 years ago, running for 68 hours in his backyard ultra, where you start off every
yes.
single hour. And you would think, yeah, that is extreme, and that is very, very, it is very extreme. But the lead up to that, when coming back to, I think he must have a very strong why, because he
Mm,
went from Stockholm to the US. But as he went, I think somewhere above Iceland, the plane had to turn around, go back to Stockholm. And I think he went back to sleep for a few hours, get back on another plane, went to Washington and drove down to Tennessee, arriving like he bought a few things at Walmart, arriving just at the crisp of starting the race,
Wow.
really, really tired. And really, he said he was really annoyed with himself and really tired and everything. And
Yeah.
thought, I'm here to enjoy this race. I spent money on this, like taking time on a calendar and my
Mm.
family
Mm.
with my friends, because ultras are kind of like, those guys, it's competition, I guess, and friends. And then he said, I'm just going to enjoy myself. And he started doing running. And then as time went on, and in those long events, it's not like an hour or two. I think like he was just doing it. And I don't know, like 50 hours, that's when they say the race starts. So it's a long warm up. And he started like realizing, I feel fine. And so lack of sleep, he had an extreme lack of sleep because he hadn't
Yeah.
slept that night.
Yeah.
And that's not how you want to start a multi-day ultra
Yeah.
marathon.
No.
So, and I don't know about his nutrition, and then it was just him. I think her name is Courtney DeWalters, a woman, which is also interesting. There were 5 or 6 people after like 55, 60 hours, something like that. And one by one went off. And then I think there was they were running around in a lap 6.2 kilometers, something like that, every
Yeah.
hour. And at a certain point, there was a hill going up, and he just felt good, and he just increased the pace a little bit. And mind you, that it doesn't matter when you arrive to the next.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're up 100 meters or 200 meters, it's not like a race where you're going to the
Yeah.
finish line first. But mentally,
It
that
just
just showed
breaks him.
her that he
Yeah.
was stronger. And you're so in tune, those little differences. Like if you're out running, like after 5 kilometers, you probably wouldn't pay attention. But that little just kind of at that time mentally broke her.
Yeah.
And why would that happen at that, 67 hours or whatever? Could have happened much earlier or later. But it's just that little increase in speed. And he had a stronger why that
Mm.
day. And he just had to do another lap, and then he was done. So for me, that tells me there are many other things in play, because that was, I think, one of the first times he won a really big race. So it's not just nutrition, like a
Yeah.
checklist of all these things. For training, all these things, they're very, very important. But there are other things at play that you need in this kind of like pyramid for when you get to these extreme
Yeah.
levels.
Yeah.
But
And
I
I
think,
think, yeah, no, I just think that um, all those like the trade, the physical training that you'll have done, your nutrition, your sleep, all those things are like they're your basics, they're your foundations. It's almost like get them lined up. Like otherwise, you're just going in. It's like going into a gunfight with a knife. Like go in prepared. But then, like you say, the where you are able to go with your mind after that will determine how you actually where you actually get to within the thing that you're doing. Um, I'm going to call it an event rather than a race because only the top tiny percent are trying to win these things. The rest of us are just trying to get to the end
yeah,
and have an experience. And it's really like, where where do I go with my mind during that experience that actually gives me something to take into my actual life? Like that's where the reason is, or one of the reasons for doing these things, um, is for me. Um, and whether somebody is doing an ultra or not, it's just that's just any type of running. Um, Someone that's never done a 10K before will know what we're talking about when they're like, maybe they've signed up for a 10K and in their head they're going like, I don't know if I can run for that long. Like if you've just never even done a 10K before. And so what are some of your tips other than sort of making sure that I was aware of being scared? Like because
I think, yeah.
I've done a few now. Like for example, I've got like um I've got 2 events this year, which is the first, and both of them we did last year. And I've never done an event twice. So I'm actually quite looking forward this year because mentally I know what to expect. And that's making like a huge difference. But is there any from yourself, or you say like was it you said it was your cousin that had done some pacing
Yeah,
for
he
Goggins?
pacing, and that's special for like how it works in ultras. Certain races, you're allowed to have a pacer usually
Yeah,
at the end. Not all races, it depends on the race, but so yeah, he's paced Davy Goggins and I like in Badwater, which is one of these 135-mile race in the
yeah,
desert where the temperatures are in July, I guess, around 45 to 50 Celsius on average.
yeah,
And that's the whole purpose. And it's I guess a very few people because that's a new dimension, because then you add heat to the race. So
yeah,
135 miles is not in the ultra like the elite. It's not, you know, extreme in any way. But when you come to bring the heat, it's a
oh yeah,
complete game changer. So that is you really have to. I think those type of races, when you bring heat as a factor,
yeah,
you really have to know what you're doing. And since you don't do it that often, things can go wrong pretty quickly. So that's a complete, I would say that's a completely different race when you bring in heat like that. But
yeah,
taking a step back to, I think also to analogy of life, like ultras is just one step, one step, one step. It may not be fast, but if you move towards your goal, every step going slowly.
yeah,
By the way, some ultras are you have to find your way. So sometimes you actually go on a detour. You don't. You kind of they're they make it on purpose hard to find a way. So
yeah.
I actually ran a race where there was a guy from Japan who ran 4 hours in the wrong direction. That's the whole purpose.
Ah,
That's the whole purpose of
I know.
breaking down people. You
And
make a
that breaks you
mistake.
mentally,
They're very
doesn't it?
mental. That's the whole purpose of knowing that if you know you may run right. I mean, run the wrong way, but in ultras it's different, a little bit similarities to tennis. You move forward slowly, then eventually you will get there. So I think that's the analogy to life. So, but it's extreme events, and it's not appealing for a lot of people because of that.
Yeah.
But if
Let
you
me just can I
start with,
just let me just pick up on because I think that this is the thing that like what I'd said earlier when I said like it sound I can't remember what it was. What did I say that sounded like cheesy? Oh, that we can achieve more than we think we can. Like, and it sounds corny when you haven't actually had an experience where literally you can't imagine being able to take another step, but somehow you do another 50 miles, let alone that one step. And as you said that, and I know exactly what you mean when you say like it is as simple as taking just the next step, not the next 50 miles, but just the next step. And those analogies of life. But for people that haven't yet, maybe there's some people that are, oh, maybe I'd like to go and do an ultra. I'm thinking about it, or those that just hear that one step at a time and just think, well, that just sounds too cheesy or too corny, or applying that to my life, like at the moment, I don't feel like I can take one step. Like, do you have any things that you go to or advice that you'd have or mental tricks or things that when you literally feel like whether it's an ultra or whether it's life, work, family problem or something where you're like, I don't know if I can I don't, not if I don't know, just I don't think I can do this thing. Where do you take yourself, or what advice have you got for someone that's going like, yeah, I want to take that next step, but I don't feel like I can.
I recognize that it's very difficult, but coming back to ultras or even like Navy SEALs, it's just if you have a goal like 100 miler for whatever, you know, it's too big or in business or whatever, you break that down into chunks and you break those chunks into smaller and eventually in ultras, one step. And if you have a business, that means just taking action and just, you know, because you get overwhelmed. And when you get overwhelmed, you start thinking. So you want to even sometimes, you know, I even move and just physically move to get and try to do some stuff. It's difficult because the weight of having some of these things, you get in almost like in a freeze position, like you don't do anything and you start thinking even
Yeah,
more. So it's about your ability to take those like in ultras or in business, micro steps, because they add up over time, and it's like a compound interest over time. You know, they just add up, and it's very, very difficult. But I think that is what I would say, and it doesn't work all the time, but it's better than if it works 50% of the time. It's at least better than what you would normally do. So you can break it down, break it down, break it down. So all these events are like how your mind works, not so much how your body works, because it's about you're playing yourself the whole time. You're thinking, and you want to move out of that. So that's what I would do, and move physically to get out of your head.
Micro. I love the micro steps. It's like if taking the next step feels too much, too big, like break it down even further. It reminds you, you're taking me back to a place where I woke up to start the final day, the third day, and I felt really like unwell, as in like I don't think this is going to be safe for me, like, and some things around like my brain injury from years gone by, and I was just like, I don't know if this thing, and my wife was like, if you don't try to like get out of bed, if you don't try, you're gonna, I know what you're like, you're gonna be, you know. So I do that, and I'm sat on the toilet crying my eyes out, and my sister comes to say to me like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like crying. I'm like, "Susie, I can't do it," and I'm like blubbering of idiot. I can't do it. I can't. And she said, "Just try and get in the car. Do you think you can try and get in the car?" And I was like, because there was a very interesting question. I don't know that she's do it. She said there was a keywords was try. So she didn't tell me like you have to. It was like try, and I was like, okay, I'm a trier. I can try. Yeah, I can try. And she didn't say try and get to the end of the race today. She just says get in the car, because she knows if I get in the car, someone else is going to drive, like my sister-in-law drive, my wife drive me to the start line, and that started the process. And so for me, it was like the micro steps, like you said, and also two things. How many micro steps are there before the actual first step? That made it. And then the other really key thing was like actually support. And this is what I'm thinking about more like in life, like where can you get support from people to help you take some of those micro pre-steps before the first step, because then you start to get the ball rolling. You know that, you know, if you flipping it on its head towards like ultras, there's some ultra events where you're not allowed any support from anything, but there is still ways that you can have support, in that, like, you know, someone could have, I don't know, your wife or your husband or someone you love could have written you a message. You tell them beforehand, you go, right, write me something down that when I'm absolutely hacked at the end, that I'm going to pull this out of my pocket, I'm going to read it, and that's going to spur me on. Like, you could do that. I don't know, just that's just off the top of my head, but there's things that you can do, and I love the micro
I think,
steps.
yeah. And the feeling afterwards, the accomplishment that you don't think you can do, just expands to other areas. That's the benefit. That, like, it's not
Exactly,
about
that's
only
it.
that
That's the
event.
thing.
It's a great feeling, but that kind of start you thinking about what else can I do? You can actually use that as a springboard
Yeah.
to everything else. And I think that is, and people just sometimes they give up, or lack of maybe the insecure they're going to do it, but just try, and then keep on going, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. Like, there are ways to do it. You start with a 5K, a 10K, a 15K. Same in business. You start small and try to build it up, and just take action over and over. Sometimes you're like the Japanese guy. You go on a detour. That's the party. That's the party. You have to be prepared for that as well, because it's not going to be a straight line up. You're going to have the valleys of going down. You have to expect those valleys going down, and that is also why you feel the high when you're at top. So just go with that, and actually, I would say don't look. What's very important when you do, like, for instance, these races, or like when you're in an ice bath or whatever, don't wish you're somewhere else. be in that present moment
Yeah,
again
that's
with
key.
that pain, because that, you know, it's going to happen. That is why you're there, to experience what's on the other side of that pain as well. And when you're in an ice bath or any sort of tough, if you do a small project in business that just takes 5 minutes and or 5 hours, like, yeah, that was great. But if it takes 5 years with a lot of ups and downs, the satisfaction
Yeah.
after is so. Think about that. That if it was easy, there's really no satisfaction, because
You wouldn't,
anybody,
yeah, you wouldn't enjoy it if
you
it's
wouldn't
the,
enjoy it in the same way. So you need that tension, but at the same time, you need to break it down, because if it's
mm,
too big, you set the goals
too
too high, because that's
overwhelming.
easy to do. You
Yeah.
get overwhelmed and it's causing you stress all the time. So it is a delicate balance again.
Yeah, I feel like
Uh,
it's part of the human condition of like we seek comfort and something to be easy, and then when we get that, we're not satisfied because it was too easy. But then the
yeah.
hard route feels like, oh, I don't, that feels too hard, I don't want to do it. But actually, that's the thing that then you then get those senses of satisfaction from. And I love what
No,
you said, like with the,
yeah, I think I heard a good saying from somebody the other day on social media. He said, our nervous system is hardwired for comfort, but our soul is wired for growth. And
oh,
that's, you
nice.
know, they're
Yeah,
working
yeah.
against your soul
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
but your whole, you want to be on the couch, you know, and just
Yeah,
have a good life with a good temperature. So that was I think that's why you have that, you know, two things
I like
working
that. Yeah,
against
the
each
soul
other.
wants growth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that was good, and the way they
yeah,
explained it. So yeah, and I realized that these ultra events are not for everyone, but you can say somebody who is in business that works very, very hard is
yeah,
also extreme in its own way.
yeah,
And it's not for everyone, but I think that one step ahead, what you said, that is
yeah.
a good way to start, because otherwise you won't know what you can do.
Yeah. Well, I think, you've said it a lot of the time, even with the what we started talking about with the tennis, and then also that you've brought it back often to like this analogy of like, well, this is also just like how life is. And so, like, what's an ultra event? An ultra running event involves running, and technically more than a marathon. But an ultra event, or in an ultra running event, what are you doing? You're running for a very long time at a very slow pace, and you're going through these ups and downs, and you're trying to like get to the end. And what you said there was a really important point for me of like not wishing you're somewhere else. So if you're always trying to get to the end, you then miss out on the experience of going through it. And life is an ultra event. Life is something that you just have to keep turning up, whether you automatically turn up. The tomorrow will come, and too often we're trying to make things happen quicker. We're in a rush, and it's like understanding that the end line, the end of the race of life, is death. So it's like, why am I rushing to get to there rather than and then missing out on the experience of being here? Um, and life, like the ultra running events, has the ups and downs. I think that there's so much in that, and if people that aren't into running listening to this can zoom out and apply it to just like those analogies of and how I can start to see, okay, how I can think about these things to help me with that in my life. There's there's a lot that we can, yeah, a lot that we can take forward, and I think that there'll be. I just want to mention this little thing. There'll be a lot of like coaches, particularly like coaches within the breathwork world, that listen to the podcast. That it will resonate with them. That the stuff it takes a while to build up your business and build up your clients, and there's lots of ups and downs, and there's struggles within that of what we're trying to do and achieve. But you'll bringing back what that one word that you said, like the purpose, like with if you're teaching breathing, like there's going to be a reason for that. You don't get into teaching breathing if you haven't had something is making you want to do that, and so you've got some strong purpose towards that. And if everything that you want to try and achieve with your your coaching and everyone that you want to try, like, happened boom overnight in one day and it's there, like, you wouldn't be satisfied. You'd still be trying to find for more. And it's a it's a long, slow game, and there's lots of ups and downs, and that's like an ultra running event, and it's like life. And
Yeah,
I
it
think
is.
that, yeah, I hope people can take a lot from what you've said today. I certainly have. Have you got any final specific, like, right, you've got an ultra, it's someone's first ultra, or it doesn't matter if it's their first one, but they've got an ultra that is making them feel like, okay, this is I haven't done this one before, or I haven't gone this far before. What what's your best bit of advice? It could be more than
Yeah,
one. If
yeah,
I'm
it's
like,
tricky
look,
because I met, and everybody are different. There's so many ways. Some are very good at just go in there and they just do it. Some have very, tight Excel sheets and kind of keep a certain pace and rest at this. And they start, they run for 150 meters and there's a slight hill, they start walking. So you have all these strategies, but
yeah, strategy.
I would just kind of go back to what we said and said, if you're doing a long race, if you're not one of those in the elite that's there to win, they know they're going to do the distance and they're there to win, do a certain
Yeah,
time. I would say lean into that pain when you're in there, because coming back to the present moment, I had some experiences when you feel very, very bad, but after that, not always, but sometimes, which is always, it's not like a button you press and you get into
yeah,
that, you get that runner's high or that present moment where time and space actually just goes away. And the only problem is the better you get, usually the longer it takes because you get used to that. So it's
yeah,
actually beneficial when you're new because after five,
yeah,
6 hours, you don't necessarily feel that. But once you get up to running for 10, 12, 14, 15, 16, 20 hours, and the pain starts increasing, once that, sometimes you're going to make the distance or not actually, but just you can get into that flow state or that
yeah,
runner's high where this disappears and you just here and now. You don't think about it and you're just there. And that is, you just do it for the sake of doing it. And at that point, whether you make it or not to the end is not the main goal. Like you
yeah.
have that before, but in that mode, you're just there and you
Just
just
in it.
feel fine. So I
Yeah,
think if you have a job or if you're an ultra, that's what you want to lean into. If you have a lot of pain in your business, or it's also imagine if you can get out on the other side, the satisfaction you get, and you're kind of in that moment. Of course, if the stress is too high in business, because usually you're overthinking, you can have, of course, on the other side. But if you get into that state where you just enjoy what you're doing, even though it's very, very tough,
yeah,
then you're actually lucky. It's not about, like you said, reaching the end destination. It's about the experience of business or ultra, because you can do 100 ultras and not feel anything really, or you can, and then it's not, there's no purpose really. But if
mm,
you feel something when you do it, same in business, if you're doing something that's to you has a lot of purpose. That's the most important thing. So I think
yeah,
lean into that versus, and then you can always use, because people have different strategies, but I think that drives you. That drives you to the finish line, and that's very, very important to have something like that to anchor on. And then of course all the things that we talked about, breathing is very, very important, sleep, nutrition, and anything else. But it's like a holistic system. So I think again, ultras can be used as a means to improve other aspects of your life as well.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. No,
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
No, absolutely
So
love it.
yeah,
I'm going to add on a piece of advice. Um, if you're typically these types of events are on at weekends, if you can book yourself off at least Monday, maybe Tuesday off work as well, because you're going to need a couple of days to be able to walk again, probably. Um,
that's a good advice. Yeah.
yeah, nice. Right. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for your time being on the podcast. If people want to find out a bit more of the work that you do as you're a fellow master instructor with the Oxford Advantage and the work you're doing within within tennis? Like, where can people find you on socials and then website and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, my brand name is Flow Switch, so they can find me either on my website, flowswitch.se from Malmö, Sweden, or Flow Switch Mind on Instagram, where I try to post every now and then about the stuff that I do. So that's
Yeah,
the easiest to get, some more tips on also how to incorporate this into actually a lot of CrossFit or functional movement as well. So that's where
nice.
people can look for more. Yeah.
Brilliant. So, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed Daniel on the podcast. Head over, give him a follow. I'm sure if you have any direct questions for him, you can contact him, slide into his DMs. And if you have enjoyed listening to the podcast, we'd love you to maybe share it with a friend, family member, someone you think would benefit from it. Even post a little screenshot on your Insta and tag each of us in it, and we will see that and share it too. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you,
listening.
Jacko.
We'll see you next time. There we have it. Tennis, sports, ultra marathons, and actually, most importantly, life. I hope there's a lot that you can take away from that. I'm excited after we finish the podcast. We were talking about if Daniel is over in the UK, and potentially me planning a visit to Sweden to see him and run some training and some workshops out there in Sweden, which would be next year, 2025. So keep an eye out for that if you're in the that part of the world. What do we got? Scandinavia. That's right. Where is it? If you're in Scandinavia. Yeah, I've never been, but love to. And such a top bloke is also doing some interesting stuff with his, like, he's big into CrossFit and combining CrossFit with some ultra stuff. So he's been doing some like 6 hour ultra CrossFit training. And I was like, and he was like, yeah, I think you'd like this. And I was like, yeah, let's go and get a little bit involved in that for a bit of fun. Type 2 type of fun, obviously. But yeah, thank you to Daniel, obviously, being on the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you haven't yet subscribed, I'd love you to subscribe. It's available on like Spotify or all your podcast platforms. If you want to subscribe or watch, you can see the video is on YouTube. So I'm trying to produce some more deeper, slightly longer form, but more meaningful content on YouTube, and want to prioritize more of that over the sort of short things that go on things like Instagram, where we don't get to go into the detail and we don't get to go into the depth that I think a lot of the subjects really need to. Like, they have to be like short and snappy to fit the algorithm of Instagram. So I am wanting to do some more stuff. I'm going to be prioritizing YouTube. So if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, and I know lots of you haven't because I've only got 3,000 subscribers on YouTube, then head over to the YouTube platform and you'll see I'll put a link in the show notes. But even if on YouTube you searched David Jackson breathwork, I'm sure I will come up. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following. Until next time, you've been breathing. I've been Jacko. Let's keep it nasal.